How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Zayin. No? Yes? Yes. 45. Yeah. Daf Mem Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, your friends. What can I tell you about Daf Mem Zayin? Okay. We are going to finish up the current Mishnah that we are discussing. We've been talking about, can mountains become Avodah Zarah? And even if they can't, can they be used to build the mizbeachs, for example? So the daf today is going to start off talking about, what about something like wheat? If you bow down to wheat and make a wheat into Avodah Zarah, but then you grind it up into flour, can that flour be used as a korban mincha? What about a palm tree that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah? Can you make a lulav from that palm tree? So we're going to discuss things like that, and then that will bring us to our next Mishnah, but really our next three Mishnahs that we are going to learn today, discussing topics like, can walls of houses become Avodah Zarah, and what happens if they do? I guess clearly they can. What about houses? And if you have a house that's Avodah Zarah, how are you mevatel it? What about stones? Chevra, just whetting your appetite for Daf Mem Zayin, Daf 47 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Okay, we are going to begin on Daf Mem Vav Amid Bais, about 10 or so lines from the bottom. Yomi Bar Chama. Yomi Bar Chama asks the following kasha. Hamishtach v'lekom maschitim ma'u le'menochis. Okay. So if somebody bows down to wheat, so you have some wheat planted there, and somebody bows down to it. So now, if you're the Chachamim, so you say, Nitol v'sof avdo is mutter. Okay? So if somebody bows down to the wheat, so the wheat remains mutter. Okay, if it was planted as wheat and somebody bowed down to it, it remains mutter. But now you can eat it, right? Lehedjit, it's mutter. But what about as a korban? Can you offer it as a korban mincha? So now, even if you say, yesh nevad b'mechuber aytzel gavoa, if you say, right, even if you were to say that when it comes to, so let's say an animal, for example, right? We had said that an animal, if somebody bows down to an animal, so we say that it's mutter lehedjit, for regular people, you can slaughter, you can eat it, but you can't offer it as a korban. So now here we're talking about wheat. You bow down to the wheat, and it's mutter, right? Nital v'sofad is mutter according to the Chacham. So it's mutter for regular people to consume. The question is, what about to use it as a korban mincha? So now the interesting question here, though, is that even if you say yesh nevad b'mechuber aytzel gavoa, that there is this concept of ne'evad when it comes to the wheat, and it's basically been flagged because it's been worshipped, can't be bought as a korban. But the thing is, you aren't simply offering the wheat as like a stalk of wheat as a korban. No, you're going to grind it into flour. You're going to change the nature of the product. You're going to make the wheat into some new entity. The wheat becomes flour. So the shaila is now, it's not only nevad aytzel gavoa, there's a new angle here, which is shinui. There's a shinui that took place to the wheat. The wheat is now flour. Is that important or meh? That's the Gemara's kasha. Chev, what do you think? It's a kasha, right? Right. So again, by Rami Bar Chama asks the kasha, Mishtach v'lekom maschitim, somebody who bows down to grain, to wheat. Ma'al le'menochis, can that wheat be ground into flour that will be offered as a meal offering as a korban mincha? Geshinui b'nevad and shinui b'nevad. Is there a concept of when it comes to something that was worshipped? Can you make a change to it and would that change matter? The fact that what was bowed down to was wheat, but this is flour, is that important? Is it something else? Can it therefore be offered? Omer Mar Zutra B'Rav Nachman Toshma says Well, it's a machlokes. What's the machlokes? Toshma kol asur in the gabi mizbeach v'lodaseyin mutarin v'tanya lo Rabbi Eliezer oser. So we have an interesting machlokes here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. And that is, for example, right, so it says, Kol asur in legabe mizbeach, those things that are asur to offer on the altar. So for example, an animal, if you have a sheep, and it was bowed down to as Avodah Zarah, it was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, so it's ne'evad, it can't be offered on the mizbeach. However, we're saying its babies can be offered on the mizbeach. And what we want to assume for now is that at the time that the sheep was worshipped, it was pregnant. And we're saying that when the baby is born, it can be offered as a korban. Well, according to the Tanakhama, Rabbi Eliezer says no. So Rabbi Eliezer Oser, Rabbi Eliezer says no. And we want to say that what's the machlokes here between Tanakhama, who says yes, the baby can be offered, and Rabbi Eliezer says the baby can't be offered. What's the difference? What's the machlokes? We want to argue. Marzucha Breder of Nachmi wants to say that it's a machlokes about this very point, about Shinui, that this baby was initially a fetus, was in its mother's belly, and it underwent a change, and it became its own sheep. It became born, and it's now its own sheep. It underwent a change. And the question is, how important is that change? The Tanakhama says very important. And therefore it can be offered as a korban. It's no longer considered nevad. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says, meh. Rabbi Eliezer says, once an evad, always an evad. Change, shmange. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says it's not considered, right? Whatever change happened is irrelevant. Ein shinui b'neva. Shinuis are irrelevant. So therefore, to apply that to our wheat, the question is it important that it was wheat and now it's flour? It's a machlokes. The Tanakhama would say it's important. It underwent a significant change. And Rabbi Eliezer's opinion would be it's unimportant. However, says the Gemara, not really actually. That machlokes between the Tanakhama and Rabbi Eliezer is about something else. It's about zeh v'zeh gorim. Here we go. V'lav itmar Allah, was it not stated about that machlokes Rav Nachman, Rabbi bar Avua, machlokes kishenirvu ulevasof ibru? This machlokes is not talking about when the sheep was pregnant at the time that it was worshipped. No. Let's go further for a second. Aval ibru levasof nirvu divrei akol asurin. We'll argue that no, in that case, if the sheep was pregnant at the time that it was worshipped, well then certainly the baby will be usher. It was worshipped. Of course it's going to be usher. The fact that it was born makes no difference. It's usher. The machlokes between the Tanakhama and Rabbi Eliezer is in a scenario where the sheep was not pregnant at the time that it was worshipped. It was worshipped as an unpregnant sheep. And then what happened? So now you have this sheep that was worshipped, so it's usher. It can't be offered as a korban. But now what happens? It became pregnant. Who could tell me how it became pregnant? Well, a ram came and made a baby with this ewe. A ram and an ewe made a lamb. Ram, that makes sense. Ram plus ewe equals lamb. I get it. Anyways, so now this baby is a product of a ewe that was, sorry Dana, this ewe that's a nevad and cannot be offered, and a ram that is just a ram and can be offered, and they merge, they make a moija, as my grandfather would say, and they make this lamb, which is zeh v'zeh gorim. This lamb was made by zeh, by the ewe, which can't be offered, but also by the ram, which can be offered. And the kasha is, what's the shaila of the moija? So the Tanakama says the moija is permitted, zev zegorim mutter. The double, right, the merger is mutter. And Rabbi Eliezer says zev zegorim osir, that the merger is osir. So we see that that's taka machlokas. It's not a machlokas by yeshinu beneva. No, it's a machlokas by zev zegorim. It's a shaila of at the time that the sheep was worshipped, it was not pregnant, then it became pregnant, and the baby is a product of both zev zegorim. That's the machlokas. But if the sheep was pregnant at the time that it was worshipped, certainly, right, says the Gemara at the top of Menzayin Amud Aleph Aval Ibru, if the sheep was already pregnant to Levasof Nirvu, and then it became, right, either it became Roveya, a human had beer with it, married it, or in our case it was worshipped, Teviakol Asur, and everybody would say Asur. Okay, so it's not a machlokas about. It is not a machlokes about shinoi. It's zev zegorim. Now, ve'ochinami, and here also in our case of the wheat that was worshipped, ki ebu levasov nirvu dami is basically, we want to say, is the equivalent of when it was already pregnant at the time that it was offered, and at the time that it was worshipped, and in our case as well. Right, so meaning when it was already pregnant at the time that it was worshipped, the fact that it gave birth is irrelevant here also. The fact that the wheat became flour is irrelevant. Ikadamri, there are those who say slightly different, basically the same discussion here with this machlokes between Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer, but just slightly different, right? The way that we had outlined it, basically the way that we had structured it, was that Marzucha Breder of Nachman had suggested that Shinoi Benevad is a machlokes between Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer, to which the Gemara says, right, rejects that notion. It says, no, you can't say that because actually the machlokes is only about zev zegorim. There are those who quote this slightly differently. It wasn't that they asked a kasha on Marzucha Breder of Nachman, it was that Marzucha Breder of Nachman himself pointed out that actually this is not the machlokes. So ikadam to those who say machlokes kishenirvu ulvasof ibru, that the machlokes is when the sheep was, right, in the case of Roveh, in our case it's worship, but in the case of Roveh it would be kishenirvu ulvasof ibru, and then afterwards the sheep became pregnant because it's a shaila of zev zegorim. Aval ibru, wait, I'm sorry, 1 second. Let me back up a second. Igedarm, those say there's an important Agos Abach right here. The Agos Abach says ve'itmar Allah, and it was meaning Marzucha Breder of Nachman is still talking, right? So meaning if we back up to Memvav Mud Bais, so Kilu or Marzucha Breder of Nachman Tashma Kol Aisur in the Gab Mizbeach the same Mutarim V'Tanya LeBeliezer. Oh, sir, we right. So Marzucha Breder of Nachman quotes his machlokas, and then he continues ve'itmar Allah, and then Marzucha Breder of Nachman then clarifies, and it's stated about it. Rav Nachman, now back in our Gemara, machlokes, third line of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, machlokes kishenirvu levasof ivru, that the machlokes is specifically zev zegorim, right? That first it was either married or in our case worshipped, and only afterwards it became pregnant. So the shaila is zev zegorim. That's the machlokes. Zev zegorim mutter, zev zegorim aser. That's the machlokes. Aval ibru levasof nirvu. But if they were already pregnant and then got married or then got worshipped, divrei kol asur, then everyone would agree it would be asur v'achinami and v'haninami, and also in our case of the wheat, ki ibru levasof nirvu dami is basically the same as when it, right, in the case of the wheat, it's the equivalent of when the sheep was already pregnant and then had a baby. Here also, when the wheat was worshipped and then made into flour, everyone would agree that it would still be asur if you assume that Yesh Nevon b'mechuber aytzel gavoh, that if you assume that this wheat cannot be offered as a korban, so even when it's made into flour, it can still not be offered as a korban. But the Gemara actually now says, wait a second, maybe though there is a difference. maybe there's a difference. We just wanted to say just now that the wheat being made into flour is the equivalent of a pregnant sheep that's been worshipped having a baby. And we're saying that the pregnant sheep that's been worshipped, and now, right, when it was pregnant, the pregnant sheep that was worshipped and then had a baby, everyone agrees that the baby cannot be offered as a korban. So we wanted to say, and therefore everyone would also agree that when you have wheat that's made into flour, it cannot be offered as a korban. But maybe not so fast. Maybe the cases are different. Because maybe, says the Gemara, by the sheep, the baby is already a sheep. It just hasn't, it's being blocked. It's locked, it's stuck inside the ooze belly. But it's already a sheep. But when you take wheat and you make it into flour, your mom is changing it into a new item. Maybe that could be a significant change, and maybe it could be offered on the mizbeach. Right? The Gemara says, when it comes to the pregnant sheep, that the baby sheep, even when it's in its mother's belly, was already an animal, and when it's born, it is also an animal. It was an animal before it's born, and it's an animal after it's born. Just that there was a door, i.e. the womb of the mother, was blocking it from leaving its mother, but it was an animal, and it is an animal. But in this case, before it was wheat, and now it's flour. It's a different thing. And therefore, maybe you could say that it's different, and maybe you can argue that the flour could be offered on the mizbeach. So it sounds like it's, right, as a korban mincha, so it sounds like it's a little bit inconclusive about whether grinding the wheat into flour would be significant to allow it to be offered as a korban mincha. By Rish Lakish asks, if somebody bows down to a palm tree, can you make a lulav from its branches, right? Can you climb the palm tree and find a lulav on there and now have a lulav for the mitzvah of Daled Minim? If the palm tree was milichatchila planted for Avodah Zarah, well then, obviously you can't use it as a lulav. You can't use it for anything. It's also even for regular people. It's an asherah tree. Where am I? Oh. The shaila is, what if the palm tree was just planted as a palm tree, and then later on it was worshipped? And according to Rabbi Yehuda, we said holds that nital vasof avdo is osur even lehedjit. So then obviously it's off limits. You can't use it. The shaila is, what about according to the rabbis? The rabbi said nital vasof avdo is mutter. So according to them, then in mitzvah mai, while it's mutter for me and you, maybe we can eat the dates, but can you use the lulav as a mitzvah? Can you use the lulav as a mitzvah? Can you use the lulav as a mitzvah? That's the shaila. Mimayis klape gavaya olo. Would it be considered disgusting for the Rabbeinu Shalom or not? Right? We're not offering as a korban, right? So it's not a shaila of yeshnev b'mechuber aytzel gavoa. No, we're not offering it as a korban. But at the same time, it's not just like, lehedjit either. It's for a mitzvah. So the shaila is, even though it's mutter lehedjit, when it comes to use as a mitzvah, is that kind of like off limits? Is that kind of gross? Is it ma'iseh? Klape gavoy, is it gross or low or not just Rav Dimi? Omar. Now, interesting plot twist. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar, he said the following: Ba'asher shebitla kami bayalei. How awesome is that question? When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, look, what Rish Lakish was asking about was a scenario where it was an Asherah, but then they were mevatel it. So let's say it was a tree that was planted milichatchila for Avodah Zarah. So it was an Asherah tree. Maybe you could be mevatel an Asherah tree. Where are we going to talk about it? I don't know. Maybe in 2 days from now? I don't know. Somewhere we're going to, I don't know, maybe tomorrow? I don't remember where. Somewhere we talk about 2 days from now, 3 days from now, where? I don't even know where I am. Anyways, we talk about how to be mevatel and asher. Basically, let's say you cut off the branches. You do something to show that you don't care about this. You're definitely not treating this tree as Avodah Zarah. So you mevatel the Avodah Zarah. The shaila is, what Rish Lakish wants to know is that when you have an Asherah tree that was then mevatled, so can you now take a lulav from that tree? It's a shaila from Masechta Sukkah. Also comes up with Kisui Adam. We're going to see it now. Yesh Dihuy b'mitzvis. Do we say that, well, since when it was an Asherah tree, you would be unable, and of course you can't use a lulav shel Asherah, of course not. So do we say that since when it was an Asherah tree, you could not bring a lulav from that tree, therefore you can never bring the lulav from that tree? Or do we say that since someone was mevatel the Avodah Zarah, now you can bring a lulav from that tree? That's the shaila. So because Rav Dimi Omer, when Rav Dimi came, he said, Ba'asher shabitla kami bayalei, that Rish Lakish's shaila is regarding an Asherah tree that is no longer an Asherah tree. It was nullified. Yesh Dihuy aytzel mitzvis, or ein Dihuy aytzel mitzvis, and the shaila is there Dihuy when it comes to mitzvahs? Do we say that once the mitzvah was pushed off, that since at one point you were unable to bring a lulav from this tree because it was an Asherah tree, therefore you can never, it's pushed off forever, therefore you can never bring a lulav from this tree? Or do we say, once the Asherah tree is bottled, you can now bring, you can now use a lulav from that tree? Tivshad le miditnan. So let us answer it from the following Mishnah from Kisui Hadam in Masechta Chulin. Kisui Hadam is that when you slaughter a bird or a chaya or an oaf, so you need to cover its blood. The blood falls on the floor and you cover it with dirt. So Kisov in Isgal, so let's say you're slaughtering a chicken and the blood dripped on the floor and you cover it with dirt, and then after covering it with dirt, it became revealed, I don't know, the wind blew, whatever it was, and now you could see the blood. Potter, you don't need to recover it. You already covered it. You did the mitzvah already. Potter milachas, you don't need to cover it. No chamo. Kiso aruach, but if the wind covered the blood, you did not cover the blood, the wind covered it for you, you didn't do the mitzvah. Chayav lichasas, you need to cover the blood. That's specifically talking about when it revealed itself. So meaning there was blood from the chicken and then the wind came and covered it. So you don't need to cover it because what's there to cover? It's already covered by the wind. But if it became revealed after it was covered from the wind, maybe another wind came and exposed it, well then you need to cover it now, right? You didn't do the mitzvah yet. The wind had covered it up, and now it got exposed. Do the mitzvah now. So we see ein dihuy aytzel mitzvis, that even though the mitzvah was pushed off when it was covered by the wind and became irrelevant when it was covered by the wind, but it became relevant once again when it became uncovered. So but if it never revealed itself, well then you wouldn't have to, there would be no mitzvah to cover because it's covered. And we ask, and we say, but who cares that it became exposed after being covered? Shouldn't we say that once the wind covered it, it was covered, and even when it becomes exposed once again, there should be no requirement to cover it, to cover it yourself. Once the wind covered it, the mitzvah is gone. Since there's no mitzvah now that it's covered, even if it becomes exposed, the mitzvah was canceled when it became covered by the wind. From Rav Papa, and says Rav Papa is also marries. This says ein dihuy aytzel mitzvis, that there's no dihuy when it comes to mitzvis. That mitzvahs don't get pushed off forever. No. So what did we just see? What did we just see? We saw that when it comes to kisui adam, okay? When it comes to kisui adam, you shech the chicken, the blood goes on the floor, so you cover it with earth, okay? Fine, that's the mitzvah. What happens if the wind comes and covers it for you? Well, now that it's covered, it's covered, there's nothing for you to do. At that very point that it's covered by the wind, it's nidche, it's pushed off, there's no mitzvah for you to do right now. And the shaila is that a permanent state? That once it gets pushed off, it's pushed off forever. And guess what? The halacha is that if it becomes exposed once again, you do the mitzvah. That when it became pushed off, it was only pushed off as long as it's in its current status. But if it becomes exposed again, well, now it's shaykh to do the mitzvah. It almost reminds me like if you go out to do kiddush levana, and the moon is being covered by the clouds, do you say, oh well, I'm not going to do kiddush levana, or do you wait? And now when the moon is visible, you do the mitzvah when it's visible. So you're also keilu. I don't know if it's an exact analogy, but in my mind, that's how I was thinking about it. Keilu. You went to do the mitzvah of kisei adam, the wind blew it, it was covered. Okay, so right now, there's no mitzvah to be done, it's covered. If the opportunity arises again, it becomes exposed, so you do the mitzvah then. It was pushed off now, but not necessarily forever. If the opportunity arises, do it then. So Rav Papa says that you see that there's no dihuy aytzel mitzvahs, that there's no permanent pushing off of mitzvahs. So let's answer if that's the case. So Nuchai, who could tell me what's the answer when it comes to the lulav? Who could tell me what's the answer when it comes to the lulav? It was an asherah, so obviously you couldn't bring a lulav from the asherah, but it's no longer an asherah. They were mavatzlet. They nullified the asherah. No, so what's the answer? Who could tell me? The answer is gesundte heid. Go bring a lulav from the tree. It's no longer nidche. And dihuy aytzel mitzvahs. So the Gemara says, well, actually, that was punkt Rish Lakish's shayla. Now, obviously, Rish Lakish lived in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Papa lived in Bavel, and also Rish Lakish was a first generation Amora, whereas Rav Papa was probably like a later generation Amora. Let's see. If Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were probably a similar, well, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish were like first generation Eretz Yisrael. So if we would, I don't know if they're exactly the same, but they're probably similar for sure. So first generation Amoraim in Bavel would be like Rav and Shmuel. That would be first generation. Next generation would be like Rav Yehuda, Rav Huna, Rav Nachman. Maybe you could put like Rav Chizda fits in there, Rav Shesha somewhere around there. And then after that, you would have like Rabbi and Rav Yosef. After that, Abaye and Rava. Rav Papa was a student of Abaye and Rava. So that's only fifth generation. So we're talking about first generation, fifth generation, Eretz Yisrael, Bavel. So I have to imagine that we can assume that Rish Lakish wasn't responding to Rav Papa specifically, but Kilu, this was Rish Lakish's shaila. Do we in fact say ein dihuy aytzel mitzvahs, or maybe we're actually not sure, so we're just always got to be stringent. And therefore, when it came to kisei adam, and the blood got covered by the wind, and it got covered with earth, and we say, okay, there's no mitzvah to be done right now, it's already covered, but then it becomes revealed, now it's like, do we do it or don't we do it? We say, well, I don't know if we do it or not, so just do it. Be machmir, do it. But in the case of, can I bring a lulav from this tree that wasn't a share, but now it's not, maybe we should also be machmir there and say, don't do it. Don't bring, we should be stringent and say, it is nidche. Don't bring it. So that's punkt what Rish Lakish is taka asking. Papa Gufei Boyle, that's taka of Rish Lakish's kasha. Mifsha Pshita le Papa the Ein Dihuy aytzel mitzvis. Do we say that it's obvious to a Papa, or I guess it's kind of obvious from the scenario in by Kisui Adam that Ein Dihuy aytzel mitzvis, that is simply the rule. There is no permanent Dihuy by mitzvis. Mitzvis don't get pushed off ever permanently. It doesn't matter whether it's l'chumra, like by Kisui Adam, where we say, do Kisui Adam now that it's exposed, or even the kula, say, okay, you can bring the lulav you can use the lulav now, no problem. Doesn't matter. The kula, l'chumra, doesn't matter. Or maybe we're simply not sure. Do we say dihuy or not? And therefore, we will say Ein dichuy b'mitzvahs when it's lechumra and say you have to do kisui adam, but we will say dichuy b'mitzvahs when it's the kula and say you can't bring a lulav from that tree. Teku, let's go weiter. By Rav Papa asks a kasha, hamishtachve lebehema, somebody bows down to an animal. Tzimra ma'u letcheles, can the wool be used for tcheles? Okay. Tcheles demai. What kind of tcheles? Tcheles for tzitzis? Tcheles for kohanim in the big day kahuna? Are we asking, can the wool be used for a mitzvah? Are we asking, can the wool be used for machshirei korban? Right? The garment, right? The kohanim offer korbanos. The kohanim, in order to offer the korbanos, need to wear big day kahuna. Big day kahuna, there's tcheles. So do we say that the shaila is, can we use this wool for big day kahuna, which is machshirei korban? Or is it saying, can we use the wool for tzitzis, which is a mitzvah? Can we use the wool for a mitzvah? Can we use the wool for machshirei korban? So tcheles mai, tcheles l'kayanim. Hanu bari du'am b'achom. If we're talking about, can the tcheles be used for the big day kahuna? So it's be'etzim Rabbi Bar Choma's kasha. It's interesting. Rabbi Bar Choma kind of asked two kashas. One was on yesterday's daf, yesh nevad b'mechuber aytzel gavo, yesh nevad b'mechuber aytzel gavo, yesh nevad b'mechuber aytzel gavo machshirei korban kekorban damu. Right, there was the shaila of, do we even treat machshirei korban like the korban itself? But then there's also the question of, right, so meaning, therefore, if we'd say that, well, this sheep was ne'evad, and even though lehedjit, it is acceptable, but we'll say don't use it for a korban, but here we're using it for machshirei korban, and the shaila, is it like a korban? But there's also the shaila of, that we saw from Rabbi Bar Choma today, which is, but then you're going to dye it, and the dyeing is like a shinui. And therefore the shaila is, what's the role of shinun? So that's where Bar Choma's shaila from earlier today about shinui. And if we're talking about tzitzis, right? You're saying, can you use this tcheles for tzitzis? That relates to the question of Rish Lakish. When you have this. At least before we said that we were talking, before Rav Dini came and said, well, we're talking about shinui and nidche. Initially we were saying, well, it's according to the Rabbanon, who say, nito v'charkach avdo is mutter. What about for using it for a lulav? Right? Rabbi Bar Choma came and he says, well, it's talking about nashera that we were mevatel, and we got into the whole thing about nidche and kisei adam. But before Rabbi Bar Choma came, we were trying to figure out a tree that was worshipped, can you use its lulav? And we say, well, it can't be talking about that it's osir, because obviously you can't use the lulav. It's talking about, according to the Chacham, who say, N'tal levasof avdo is mutter, but what about using it for a mitzvah? So here also, you have this animal that was nevad, lehedjit, it's permitted, but what about using its tcheles for tzitzis? So that's be'etzim Rish Lakish's kasha. So the Gemara asks, I don't get it, what are you asking? Like, what chiddush is there over here? You know, if you look at it from one way, so it's Rabbi Bar Choma's kasha. Whatever the answer is to that question is the answer to this. If you look at it from another perspective, it's Rish Lakish's kasha. Whatever the question is to there, it's the same thing here. It's like, well, what exactly are you getting at, Papa? So Enochinami, Taka, you're right. You're right. In terms of the things that you're asking about, yeah, there's no chiddush. However, the thing is, it's a loaded question. There's more to that question. Whether the wool can be used for tcheles is only one of several questions that we have about this sheep. Sure, can the wool be used for tcheles, but also can the horns be used for Hatzotzros? We'll get to Hatzotzros kasha in a minute. Can you use its thigh bones for flutes? Can you use its intestines for strings, for the harps and the lyres? According to the opinion, it says that the main singing in the bais hamiqdash was not with voices, but with the vessels. And certainly, I think I saw a note in the article that says unclear why it's exactly certainly, but then we will say, however, that it is usher because we wouldn't want to use these, right? It was a shaila. Can you use this animal that was nevad mutar lehejet? Can you use it for a mitzvah, right? Machshire korban. It was a shaila. But anyways, fine. We're saying that. Look, if ikar shira is bechli, if the main singing in the bais hamiqdash is with the instruments, so then we're saying that we should not use this animal that was slaughtered for the instruments in the bais hamiqdash, if that's the main thing. The shaila is, if you say that the main singing in the bais hamiqdash is with voices, not with instruments, well then, besumi kala ba'amu, do we say that it is just sweet, right? That the role of the instruments is just to make the crooning sweeter, and therefore we can use this animal that was ne'evad, or dilma, or perhaps afilu achi asir, or even so, it is still not allowed. Still, don't use it. Teku, let us go weiter. So we were asking, you have this animal that was worshipped as Avodah Zarah, and it's mutar lehejet, but the shaila is, should you be using it to make musical instruments for the bais hamiqdash? So we said, look, if you say that the main singing is the main thing is the instruments, well then you shouldn't use this animal. But if the main thing is the voices and the instrument, do we say? So shalas, do we view the instruments as simply accompaniment, but not super important, and maybe it's okay? Or do we say still don't do it? We say teku, let's go weiter. Chevre Tosfos is kasha. What's Tosfos is kasha? Maybe some of you were wondering, what does it mean to use the horns of the sheep, of the ram maybe, as Hatzotzros? Weren't the Hatzotzros made out of silver? Was anybody wondering that? Right, the shalos can use the horns for Hatzotzros. Horns were made out of silver, weren't they? So Tosfos says there were different kinds of Hatzotzros. First of all, Hatzotzros can even refer to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Tosfos quotes a Gemara from Shabbos, where it says Hatzotzros shipura. The Hatzotzros could be a reference to a shofar. But also, even in the bais hamiqdash, right, there was a Hatzotzros that the Kohanim blew, that we quote from, also Tosfos quotes from a Mishnah in Masechta Sukkah, and those had to be of silver. But there was also the Hatzotzros that the Levim used, and that's what we're referring to here. And apparently, I guess that could have been ram's horn. I guess a shofar. Interesting. So that's what we're talking about. Interesting. That maybe the horns, maybe the ram's horns could have been used for those Hatzotzros that the Levim used. Very interesting. But Rabba asks a kasha, somebody who bows down to a stream, can you use the water of the stream for, I guess, Nisuch HaMayim, probably also on Sukkos? I mean, that's what the Nisuch HaMayim was. What is the shaila? Well, I mean, if you're saying that, well, when he bows down to the water, he's bowing down his own reflection. Well, if he's bowing down his own reflection, well then, what does that have to do with the water? Okay, well maybe he's bowing down to the water itself, and you're curious about the water. But seifa lehejet. Well, if you're just worried about the water, then why do you have to ask about a running stream? You can just ask about if you just pull out a cup of water and bow down to that. So olam lemaya kasagid. Okay, so really he is bowing down to the water. The shaila is lemaya de kame kasagid v'kame kamei azdu. Do we say, is he specifically bowing to the water, the water molecules that he's bowing down to, and those waters are being washed away? Right? Is he specifically bowing down to what's in front of him, and the stream is washing away what he is bowed down to? But perhaps he is bowing down to the current of water, in which case it's basically the whole stream, and therefore you can't take any water from the whole stream. The dvorna demaya kasagid umi. But who cares? Even if he's bowing down to the whole current, who cares? You can't, a stream that belongs to all of the people, you can't just make the whole thing usher by prostrating yourself to it. Well, you could be talking about a stream that's entirely in his property. So what if he bows down to a stream that's entirely in his property? So would that water be usher for libations of hamiqdash? It doesn't seem like we are providing an answer for that one. So just some things to think about. What's it called about when there's something to think about? Food for thought. Food for thought. Okay, and now we are getting to 3 little mishnayos talking about different things that are Avodah Zarah and the being batel and what to do about it. Let's jump in. Mishaya bais o samuch, or really kosel bais o samuch lavodas kochavim. So it sounds like you have somebody who shares a wall with avodas kochavim. So for example, behind me is a wall, and behind that wall is my neighbor's apartment. What now? My neighbor, Reb Jeffrey, is ner l'chayid. But what if he wasn't an ner l'chayid? What if he liked to worship eggs? And not just eggs, he likes to worship walls too. And what if on the other side of my wall, Reb Jeffrey had some kind of Avodah Zarah studio, and they would bow down to whatever they could bow down to, including this wall right behind me. And let's say I own the wall, it's my wall. And they're bowing down to my wall. And my wall falls down. So the shaila is, if I rebuild the wall, I'm basically supporting their Avodah Zarah. I'm building a wall for them to worship. So in that case, and it fell down, so you can't rebuild it, because you're basically building them Avodah Zarah. They're going to bow down to it. Kate said, yeah. I said, so what do I do? Wow, that's kind of feels like a tall order. But basically, you have to go into your own space 4 amas. 4 amas is around like 6 feet. I think this whole room is probably something like 12 or 15 feet. I don't know exactly, but that's a tall order. Hakopanim. You have to go 4 amas into your own property and then build the wall, and that way it's on your own property and they can't bow down to it. Which is not interesting, because you can't make somebody else's thing Avodah Zarah. It's actually an interesting shayla. Why did Tosfos ask that kasha? That's an interesting shayla. If it's my wall and they're bowing down to it, that's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's go weiter for a second. Now, if this wall was jointly owned by me and Reb Jeffrey, and let's say it was 2 amas thick, it's a very thick wall. I think, 1 amma is what, like 1.5 feet, so like a 3 foot thick wall? Is that, it's 6 tefachim? I think it's like a 1.5 feet, right? Is that, what am I thinking? I think it's like a foot, yeah. It's like a 1.5 feet, I think, right? So 2 amas would be, wow, I feel like my brain is getting a little fried. Wait, 1 amma would be 1.5, yeah, so 3 feet thick. That's actually not so crazy. That arch right there is probably about 2.5, 3 feet wide. Not that crazy. I mean, these are old Jerusalem walls. These are thick walls. Al kopanim. So 2 amas wide, let's say. The first amma of the thickness belongs to Reb Jeffrey. The second amma belongs to me, which means that basically we could treat it as if anyways, already 1 amma of my room was already part of that wall. So then I only need to, when we reconstruct the wall, I only need to move 3 ammas into my room because I can already treat 1 amma from the wall as part of, that was already part of the wall, as one of the ammas in the room that I need to indent. Okay, so nido mechza mechza, so you could treat it half and half, and therefore your 1 amma of the wall that belongs to you can be counted already towards the 4 ammas that need to go into your home. Avon of aytzel va'afaro mitamin kisheretz, and all of the stones and wood and dirt and everything from the wall that fell down, they're all mitame like a sheretz, meaning that they're mitame maga. If you touch it, you become tomish nema shaketz to shaketzenu. Avodah Zarah, it says it's like a sheketz. It's the mitame kisheretz that if you touch it, you become tummy. But not if you carry it. Rabbi Akiva Omer says, Rabbi Akiva, kinida, that actually it's mitame like a nida shenemer tizrein kimodova. It says by Avodah Zarah, scatter them away like a nida, say tomelo, say leave manida matama b'masa, matama b'masa, and just like a nida is matama b'masa, by carrying. So for example, I think Rashi explains this as a reference to a mishka of Moshe. Basically, if you have, let's say, 10 mattresses stacked up on top of each other and a nida is on the top mattress, even the bottom mattress, which isn't technically touching, the nida also becomes tummy because it is carrying the nida. So now we are saying, so Rabbi Akiva says that these stones that the Avodah Zarah would even be metama b'masa. Okay. But if you indent the wall into your home, you're basically giving free space to Avodah Zarah, right? The wall behind me, if there was some kind of Avodah Zarah studio there and they're worshiping my wall, which again, it's interesting, Shaila, how can, maybe it's not my wall, maybe I don't own the wall, maybe it's like the outside of the building, it's like a public building or something like that. That could be. But anyways, so if I indent it into my room, well then, whatever Avodah Zarah situation was happening outside, they just got, if I'm moving a 4 ammas into my room, they just got an extra 4 ammas for their activities, for their recreational use. Well, you make it into a bathroom. What about sneeze? That wouldn't be a very modest bathroom where everybody could see you. Well, you only use it at night when nobody can see it. But we said, who's considered somebody who's modest? Somebody who goes to the bathroom at night in the same place that he goes to the bathroom during the day. And if you're not going to use this space for bathrooming during the day, well, then you shouldn't be using it as a bathroom at night. And even though we established, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that you have to schlep out to the same place they go during the day, you have to schlep out in the middle of the night. No, it means in the same way that that one would be tsanua, act themselves in a tsanua way in the bathroom during the day, they should do the same in the middle of the night. But we do see that the point is one must be modest in the bathroom. How can you have a bathroom without any kind of wall? Well, you could say you made it for like babies, to change babies, I guess. Or you make like a temporary wall so people can't see in, but it's not an actual wall. Okay, and now we get up to our next Mishnah, how to be mevatel a house, right? The Mishnah says, Rashi says, what does Rashi say? When it comes to being mevatel avodah zarah, there are 3 types of houses. Okay. A house that was milichatchila, built to be avodah zarah. You built a house that the house itself was going to be avodah zarah. Hariza osir. It's osir, it's avodah zarah. And the way to be mevatel it, would be that a ovid kechavim, right? If it's for a yid, well then it can't be bottle. If it's for ovid kechavim built the house, so the ovid kechavim would have to create some kind of significant enough damage to consider it bottle. But what if the house itself was not built for Avodah Zarah, but then additions were made to it, not necessarily like whole huge additions, but like you plastered a certain section from the wall or something, or draw on it or something like that for Avodah Zarah. Well then, you added something new there for Avodah Zarah. Where am I? Yeah. Well, the only part that's Avodah Zarah is the addition that you made, the plaster or whatever for Avodah Zarah. So just take down the plaster, throw it in the garbage. The house itself is not Avodah Zarah, just whatever was added. So whatever was added, take down, throw it away. Problem solved. If you were only using the structure as a storage unit for Avodah Zarah, well, just if you put in the Avodah Zarah, just take it out. Problem solved. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav, says Rav, Amishtacha v'lebayis osur. Somebody who bows down to a house makes it osur. So if you have a house that was not built to be Avodah Zarah, but then somebody bowed down to it, it becomes Avodah Zarah. So it means that Rav holds that when something was disconnected and then becomes connected, it's still considered disconnected. Meaning, you had all of these. How did you make the house? Let's say it's made out of stone. So you had all these stones that were quarried from a mountain, right? So therefore, right, there was tvisas idei adam. They were quarried from a mountain. They could become, if you bow down to it, it'll become Avodah Zarah. We're going to talk about stones in just a few minutes. So you built a house of stones. Let's say those stones were individual. If you bow down to it, they become Avodah Zarah. You then connect them, you build them into a house, they're still considered talosh, they're still considered, right? They're not considered karka now, right? They're not considered like a mountain that can't become Avodah Zarah. No, it can become Avodah Zarah, and therefore if you bow down to it, becomes Avodah Zarah. But our Mishnah specific is that if you build the house for Avodah Zarah, it's Avodah Zarah. Not if you bow down to it. What it means is that even if you didn't bow down to the house, but you built it to be Avodah Zarah, as Avodah Zarah, it is also as Avodah Zarah. I think Rashi points out here that this would be according to the opinion who says that, does Rashi say this? What is this? Toes of Chibur, obviously. Right? And of course, if we're saying that if you build the house, even though you didn't bow down to it, that must mean that's according to, we saw this machlokes, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? That there's a machlokes about when you build Avodah Zarah, do you then have to actually bow down to it in order for it to be osur? So this would be according to the opinion who says, no, you wouldn't have to bow down to it. So we're saying if you build a house for Avodah Zarah, even though you didn't bow down to it, it's osur. Alternatively, even if the house wasn't built for Avodah Zarah, but you bow down to it, osur. So there's two ways, be'etzim, right? So if you built it to be Avodah Zarah, even though you never actually bowed down to it, osur. Alternatively, if you bowed down to it, even though you didn't build it to be Avodah Zarah, osur. But then our Mishnah said shlosha batim, there are 3 houses. There's actually 4. The first one being when you build it for Avodah Zarah, but the one that we didn't list, which should be there, is when you bow down to it, even though it wasn't built to be Avodah Zarah. However, the thing is, for all practical reasons, for all practical purposes, there's no difference in terms of bittul. Right now, Mishnah was talking about there's 3 types of houses in terms of bittul. So in that case, whether the house was built to be Avodah Zarah or whether it was built not to be Avodah Zarah, but one bowed down to it it's the same bittul, which is you have to break it. You have to damage the house to show that, if it was Avodah Zarah, you wouldn't be doing this damage to it. So you have to damage it in such a way. And that's the same whether you built it for Avodah Zarah or if you built it as a house but then bowed down to it. Either way, the bittul is the same. Therefore, we didn't list 4 examples, right? Therefore, we didn't need 4 examples because those 2 are really the same in terms of bittul, which is what we were interested in. And now a similar Mishnah, Shalosh Avonimi. There are 3 types of stones. Even shechotzva mitchila lebimus. Harizu asur. A stone that was quarried milichatchila to be a platform for Avodah Zarah, to be for Avodah Zarah to go on it, and also to be worshiping the platform itself as Avodah Zarah. Asur, so it's also in order to fix it, to be mevatla, you'd have to cause damage to it. If you added plaster or draw or some kind of drawing on it, well then no tomashasiyed v'chiyed muteris. We'll just remove the addition, right? Only the addition, what you added was the Avodah Zarah part. Just throw that away. The stone is fine. If he simply put Avodah Zarah on it, but right, I guess just like to put it on it, but not necessarily to worship it, but he put Avodah Zarah on it, take it off, and then all good. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Ami says, Reb Ami vusha siyed v'chiyed begufa shel eved. Interesting. When in the second clause of the Mishnah, when it says that if you added plaster to the stone, so just remove it and throw it away, and then the stone is fine. So it says Reb Ami that is talking about when he marked it into the stone itself. He made etchings into the stone itself and then plastered the engravings. But the bais tanan. But this Mishnah was juxtaposed to the previous Mishnah, which talked about houses. In the houses, the plaster was put on top of it, not etched into it. By the house, we weren't talking about etching it into the house. We were talking about the plaster and plastering outside of the house. Ba'isnami, ikabeni urve. Well, you could say that in the house also between the stones, there was, well, you could see, I don't know if you could see the stones here on these walls next to me. There's whatever they put in between the stones is in between the stone. Is that what's called like tiach or what's shpachtal? Hill, what's shpachtal? I don't know. It's either like tiach or shpachtal or something. But just engrave it into the shpachtal. Oh, shpachtal must be like spackle, whatever that is. Anyways, so why is lav begufe? Fine. So why is lav begufe u mitzer? Why is not mika ben orve? But you could put it into the shpachtal. Milo skin on the shayba the shia. Yeah, but can it also be talking about where it's just like, I forget what this actually means, but like it could be even talking about when it's like smooth. Wait, I have the arts. I have to keep on having to look up what that means because I keep on forgetting what it means. But it means, is it not talking about where it had been plastered and was plastered again? Right? In previous Mishnah, we're not also dealing with the case where the wall had already been plastered, right, and then was plastered again, right. So meaning, we want to say, yeah, the previous Mishnah was talking about where he etched into the shpachtal. But the Gemara says, but isn't it also talking about where he didn't etch it into the shpachtal, where it was already plastered, and then he just plastered on top of whatever was there and added onto it? Can it also be talking about that? So, Ella, ki idma Reb Ami linyan bittul itma. Rather, the chiddush of Reb Ami is with regard to bittul, actually. It's not saying that, right there, that we're specifically talking about when he etched into the house. No, what we're saying is ve'afagab desayid b'chayid begufa shel evan kinoto mashachidesh abidam. We're saying that the chiddush is that even in a scenario where when he plastered it, he had mamish etched into the stone and added plaster into the stone, still all he needs to do is remove it and problem solve. When I may have thought that since he had like etched into the stone itself, we might treat it as that's like the stone itself should be considered like it was quarried for that purpose. And it should the whole thing should be also not just removing the plaster. Kamash Milan, even if he etched into the stone itself and then plastered that, just remove the plaster. Problem solved. However, that was Daf Mem Zayin. Daf 47 of Masechet Avodah Zarah. Wow, that was very intricate. We talked about when you have wheat and make it into flour. We said there's shinui b'nevar eis hagavo. That was kind of not clear where we landed with that. Then there was the shaila of can you use a lulav from an Avodah Zarah tree. That was also kind of not so clear. What we were talking about, like Nitol of Avdo according to the Rabbanon, but then Rav Dimi came and said he's talking about Asherah. It was a shaila of yesh dichuy it's a mitzvah, ein dichuy it's a mitzvah, ended in a teku. We talked about can you use sheep from a ram that was now the tcheles for tzitzis for kohanim, and it's a lot of unclear kind of stuff. We talked about a stream. What if you worship a stream? So there's a lot of kind of unclear stuff over there, but interesting scenarios about where things could go with nevad and mitzvis, korbanis, shinui. But yeah, a lot of inconclusive stuff. And then we got to being mevatel avodah zarah. What happens if you have a wall that's worshipped and it breaks down? And what do you do with that? And a house and a stone. And how was it made into avodah zarah? How you mevatel it? Some very technical things, but I guess important avodah zarah things. Peace.